Okay, well, it's time for another book review, and this is one I've reviewed in the past, but I wanted to cover it again in light of the top 10 video that I recently did. And those of you new to the channel, this is definitely one you want to check out if you were attracted by that latest top 10 list. This is The Assault on Truth by Jeffrey Masson. And this is Freud's suppression of the seduction theory. And this is from 1984. And this is a really fascinating book, and I think a really pivotal book in understanding kind of the political situation surrounding the treatment of child sexual abuse. And I was really struggling about whether or not to include this on my top 10 list just because it's more broad in scope than the SRA kind of stuff. So I thought I'd leave this to its own thing. And I might put this in another top 10 list, who knows. But the fascinating thing about this, and this is a critical piece of psychological history, in my opinion. And I think this is one of those things that if you research any of the kind of stuff you see on this channel, I think this is a valuable piece of that bigger puzzle to understand how all this stuff works. Freud originally came out in the late 1800s, came out with what he called the seduction theory. And the seduction theory was a result of his work with a lot of adult patients of suffering from adult neurosis, as he called it, that the more he spoke with these patients, the more he realized that there was a significant pattern of child sexual abuse that played into their adult neurosis. And that caused him to write up this theory that he had figured out that most of these patients he was seeing, their neurosis was directly related to abuse as a child. And not just any kind of abuse, typically sadistic sexual abuse at the hands of a relative, typically a mother or father. And he presented this to his peers, and of course he was active in Vienna, Austria. Most of his patients were the well-to-do, the high society types in Vienna, Austria. So these were not, he was not working, in the ghetto. He was working, major folks, the children of the wealthy elites of the day. So when he presented this paper, his theory to his peers, he was shot down immediately and told in no uncertain terms that he could not present that theory, that if he were to go forward with that theory, that it would destroy his career. And so Freud, being the I don't know what a good word for it, maybe flunky is the right word, but being the flunky that he was, he did a 180 on that, and returned with a totally new theory that blamed it on the child, that said this is all in the child's head, that this is kids imagining this scenario, and that when it becomes their attraction, their sexual attraction for their parents becomes so overwhelming that they create these scenarios and these fantasies in their head, and then that becomes adult neurosis. And the really troubling thing about this, and this is why I think this is such an important book, is you see that moment where psychoanalysis was kind of turned on its head to basically to favor the abusers. And there's no other way to look at that. Freud realized which side his bread was buttered on, and he went with it. Realizing that if I upset my elite clientele, I'm going to be screwed. So instead, he conjured up a theory that fit the needs of the elite social circles of the day. And I think this is a really important thing to remember when we look at the problem of modern abuse and realize this is not a new thing. The Jeffrey Epsteins of the world, all the other P. Diddy's and all the stuff coming out, there's always been an effort to paint this as a problem of the lower classes and not allow people to see it for what it is. So this does a great job of ripping the veil off of that, and it also covers some fallout that happened later where Freud had some other students later on that stumbled into the same thing. And when they attempted to bring this to Freud's attention, he shot them down and threatened to disown them and to distance himself from them and cut them off if they pursued this line of thinking. So really dark stuff in that respect. And that's the really messed up thing about this book, is he's basically outing Freud as a protector of abusers, basically creating a theory that was created for the sole purpose of protecting rich abusers. So I think this is a really important book in light of that, again, taken in light of a lot of contemporary events. This is really important stuff to look at. It's difficult to look at. Some of the accounts in this are really troubling, but I think, again, this is a really important book, and if you are into studying any kind of psychological topics, this is a must-read to understand the kind of state of things. Because my oldest daughter is actually a psychology major now, and even now, even after the false memory syndrome got disbanded back in 2019, she had a professor who was really leaning in hard and pushing the whole false memory thing. And I'm going to close with this, because whenever I cover topics like this, somebody always goes, well, there's, what about false accusations and all? Well, of course there's false accusations. Just like that happens with literally every crime. There are people who burn down their own house and blame it on somebody else. There are all kinds of criminal behavior. There's all kinds of criminal conspiracies, things like people conspiring to murder someone so they can get their money and blame it on somebody else. Or there's people that make up false accusations all the time. So that's not just because there are people who make up accusations about someone else doesn't mean it's all fake. It means that person lied. And it's real important to sort that out, because it's funny when you start dealing with topics like this, if somebody finds one instance of a false accusation, they say it's all fairy tale, and that's ridiculous. You would never apply that logic or that kind of reasoning to any other criminal endeavor. So, again, that's where you have to look at a lot of other things surrounding that and figure that out, and not, obviously, we want to listen to we want to listen to victims and listen to survivors, but there's a lot more that goes into it than just, if somebody accuses somebody of X, it is automatically true. There's obviously other checks and balances in our legal system for that. But it's the people like the False Memory Syndrome Foundation that really want to blur that line and make it just, well, if someone accuses someone, then that accusation falls apart in court, then obviously all the accusations are false. And that's, again, you would never apply that logic to any other crime. So, excellent book. I highly recommend, if you can. This one's pretty easy to find on Amazon, but excellent book, excellent part of my library. It is very dark reading. This is one of those that some of the cases in here he talks about are very troubling to read. But again, this is a really important piece of that psychological puzzle in seeing how some of this stuff is treated today. And that's the saddest part, is that there has always been, human nature is such that there's always an effort to support the abuser. And the main reason, Lynn Crook said this in her book, and I'll link to that at the end of this video, that the problem is that the abuser is asking nothing of you. The victim is asking you to do something. So it's always going to be easier to side with a perpetrator, because all they're asking you to do is the status quo, which is absolutely nothing. Whereas a victim is asking for some kind of action to take place. So it's important to always, obviously all accusations need to be weighed out soberly and looked at very carefully. But anyway, this is a very important part of that puzzle, and important to look at in light of a lot of the current trends about things happening in the world, P. Diddy, Epstein, that sort of thing. It's amazing to me how much of that is now making its way into the news that a lot of guys like me were hearing stories about 20 years ago, and it sounded pretty crazy then, and it's still crazy now, but now we know that it was happening on a way bigger scale than even I thought. So anyway, I'll stop there. But that is The Assault on Truth by Freud's Suppression of the Seduction Theory by Jeffrey, I'm not going to say his middle name because I can't pronounce it, Masson.